Have you ever wondered why so many women, after years of appearing calm, composed, and even content, suddenly begin to change once they cross the age of 40? Why does it often look like stability gives way to restlessness, or that confidence turns into sudden chaos? This is not just a question about age, biology, or midlife crises. It's a question that cuts deep into the psychology of human existence. Today we dive into this uncomfortable but fascinating topic through the minds of two very different thinkers. Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher famous for his brutal honesty about life, women, and human suffering, and Curtis Yarvin, a modern political theorist whose controversial but sharp perspectives on human nature and social order are forcing people to rethink what we thought we knew. This video is not about flattering answers. It is about raw, uncomfortable truths that most people avoid. Both Schopenhauer and Yarvin are not interested in telling people what they want to hear. They are interested in exposing what is real, no matter how unsettling. And when we combine their perspectives, we begin to see patterns about women, about aging, about power, and about the illusions we carry throughout life. So let us begin this journey. The title may sound shocking, The Harsh Truth About Women at 40, but as you will discover, this is not simply about women. It is about human beings, about time, and about the way illusions collapse when reality can no longer be ignored. Part 1. Schopenhauer's View of Women and Aging. Arthur Schopenhauer was never afraid of controversy. In fact, he seemed to thrive on it. He believed that human life was fundamentally driven by what he called the will and endless, blind striving for survival, reproduction, and desire. For him, love, attraction, even relationships, were not about romance or spiritual fulfillment, but about biology's cunning way of ensuring the continuation of the species. And when you apply this idea to the life of women, something startling emerges. Schopenhauer argued that the power of women, especially in their youth, comes largely from nature's design. In youth, women are given what he considered their strongest weapons: beauty, charm, and the ability to attract. These qualities, he thought, were not random but deeply tied to reproduction and survival. Nature equips women to draw men, form unions, and continue the cycle of life. But he warned, these gifts are temporary. They are powerful, but they fade. By the time a woman reaches her 40s, Schopenhauer believed she begins to face a cruel irony. The qualities that once defined her power, physical beauty, youthful energy, fertility, no longer hold the same force. And this, according to him, often leads to what he called restlessness and discontent. The illusion of permanence shatters. Where once admiration and desire came effortlessly, now there is a struggle. Schopenhauer's tone was undeniably harsh, but he wanted to expose a reality that society often hides. Much of human value, especially in traditional social structures, is built on appearances and youth. When that slips away, individuals, particularly women in his analysis, are confronted with the terrifying question, who am I when the mask of youth is gone? This is where the crazy perception often emerges. Not because women suddenly change in essence, but because society and even they themselves begin to measure their worth differently. Schopenhauer insists that this tension is not a matter of morality but a matter of nature's design, a cruel law that no one can escape. Part 2. Curtis Yarvin's Modern Perspective. Now let's fast forward almost 2 centuries into the world of Curtis Yarvin, a thinker who, like Schopenhauer, is not afraid of brutal truths. Yarvin is often seen as a political theorist, but at his core he is also a social critic. He dissects how power operates in society, how illusions of freedom often hide deeper hierarchies, and how modern culture itself manipulates us. So what happens when we apply Yarvin's lens to the question of women at 40? Unlike Schopenhauer, Yarvin is less concerned with metaphysical will and more concerned with how systems, hierarchies, and culture create illusions. He would argue that modern Western culture sells a story to women, the story that they can have it all: endless beauty, endless freedom, endless validation. Social media intensifies this illusion, convincing women that they are always seen, always relevant, always desired. But here's the crash. When reality inevitably arrives, when age changes, the body, when attention fades, When youthful validation slows, many women experience a dissonance. The story culture told them collides with the reality they now face. And this, Yarvin might say, is not insanity but the breaking of a spell. The system promised eternal desirability, but the system lied. Yarvin, like Schopenhauer, sees human beings trapped in illusions. The difference is that Schopenhauer blames nature, while Yarvin blames culture and politics. Yet when their ideas meet, something powerful emerges. Both suggest that women at 40 often confront the collapse of illusions, whether biological or cultural. And when illusions collapse, chaos often follows. This is why some observers see women at this stage as crazy. But the truth, as both Schopenhauer and Yarvin would argue, is that what looks like madness is actually the shock of encountering reality after years of comfort in illusion. Part 3. The Midlife Awakening. Identity Beyond Illusions. If Part 1 and 2 revealed how illusions collapse at 40, Part 3 takes us deeper into what comes after the collapse. Because the real story is not only about loss, it is about awakening. When women cross 40, many find themselves at a crossroad. On one side, there is nostalgia for what once was. The youth, the attention, the validation, the sense of effortless belonging in society's narrative. On the other side, there is the possibility of something new, an identity not based on beauty, not based on external admiration, but on inner strength and authenticity. Schopenhauer himself, although pessimistic, hinted at this possibility. If the will that drives us loses its grip, if desires weaken, then perhaps freedom emerges. For a woman who no longer has to define herself by the gaze of others, life can take a new form. It may be more solitary, more inward, but also more authentic. Curtis Yarvin, though critical of illusions, would push this further. He would say, once the false narrative of eternal desirability collapses, the individual is free to see society's lies for what they are. The woman at 40, in her so-called madness, may actually be experiencing clarity. She sees that the system lied to her, that the culture used her, and that the promises of endless validation were hollow, and in that collapse she may discover a new kind of sovereignty. This is why the phrase crazy at 40 is both misleading and revealing. What looks like instability might be nothing more than a violent rebirth, a sudden tearing away of illusions that leave someone raw, vulnerable, but closer to truth. In that sense, 40 is not just an age, it is a mirror. And in that mirror, every person must confront what is real about their existence. Part 4. Power, Desire, and the Struggle for Relevance. But let us not romanticize this process. Schopenhauer's harshness reminds us that the collapse of illusions is often painful, even cruel. When the external markers of power fade, many women face a desperate struggle to maintain relevance. This is not because they lack value, but because society itself is structured in a way that constantly measures human worth in shallow terms. Think of social media today. Platforms like Instagram or TikTok feed off youth, beauty, and endless performance. Women in their 20s dominate the spotlight, while women in their 40s often feel invisible. The attention that once came effortlessly now demands effort, strategies, even artificial enhancements. And here, both Schopenhauer and Yarvin would see something disturbing. Schopenhauer would say, this is simply the cruelty of nature at work. The will no longer favors them because their biological role has shifted. Nature is indifferent to suffering, indifferent to fairness. It gives gifts, then takes them back. Yarvin, on the other hand, would expose how the system itself, modern culture, media, entertainment, deliberately exploits this struggle. He would argue that society creates a treadmill of relevance, forcing women to chase what they cannot keep. Instead of offering dignity in aging, culture turns aging into a crisis. Instead of honoring maturity, it glorifies endless youth. And so many women at 40 experience a dual crisis: the natural fading of biological allure and the cultural demand to remain endlessly visible. This is why crazy becomes the word people throw around. But beneath that label lies something deeper: the violent clash between nature's indifference and culture's manipulation. Part 5. The Shadow of Schopenhauer and Yarvin's Challenge. At this point, we can begin to see how Schopenhauer and Yarvin, despite their different eras, converge on a shared insight. Illusions sustain us, but illusions also betray us, and women at 40 stand at one of the sharpest edges of this betrayal. For Schopenhauer, the woman who crosses 40 is stripped of the illusions nature once granted her. Her power to attract wanes, her role in reproduction shifts, and society's admiration dims. He offers little comfort, only the raw truth that this is the way of life. For Yarvin, the woman at 40 is stripped of the illusions culture imposed on her. The system told her she would always matter in the same way, that beauty and relevance could be stretched indefinitely. And when reality crashes in, the betrayal feels unbearable. But unlike Schopenhauer, Yarvin leaves room for a radical conclusion. Once you see the lie, you can refuse it. Once the spell is broken, you can stop chasing illusions and start living on your own terms. This is perhaps the harshest truth of all, that the so-called madness at 40 is not madness at all, but a confrontation with reality so sharp that most people cannot bear to witness it. It is easier to call it crazy than to admit it is truth. And here lies the challenge. Will women at 40 cling to illusions, desperately trying to hold on to what cannot be saved? Or will they embrace the brutal honesty of Schopenhauer and the cultural critique of Yarvin and carve out a new existence, one that is not dependent on the lies of biology or the lies of society? This, then, is the hidden gift inside the collapse, the chance to see clearly, to live authentically, and to step into a stage of life that is not defined by others but defined by self. It is not easy, it is not painless, but it may be the only path to freedom. Part 6. Freedom in the face of decay. The collapse of illusions can be terrifying, but hidden within it is the possibility of freedom. Schopenhauer would insist that freedom comes when the endless striving of the will begins to weaken. In other words, when the desires that once controlled us lose their grip, the chains fall away. For women at 40, this may mean stepping out of the role that society, biology, and culture forced upon them for decades. No longer defined solely by the demand to attract, no longer shackled to the cycle of desire and reproduction, a woman can find herself at the threshold of a new existence. Schopenhauer called this state resignation, but not in the sense of defeat, in the sense of transcending the constant hunger that enslaves most of humanity. Yarvin would frame this differently. He would not speak of metaphysical will, but of systems and control. He would argue that once a woman sees through the cultural game, the endless demand for youth, the endless demand for relevance, she can step outside of it. She may still live in the system, but she no longer has to obey it blindly. And that awareness, that sovereignty of thought, is itself a radical act of freedom. Freedom, however, does not come without a cost. To break from illusions is to walk a lonely road. Most of society is still trapped in the performance, still enslaved to the desire for validation, still blind to the truth. The woman at 40 who awakens may find herself misunderstood, labeled, even ridiculed. Yet in that solitude lies her greatest strength. The strength of someone who no longer lives for illusions but for truth. Part 7. The new power of women beyond 40. If youth gives women power through attraction, what then is the power of maturity? Both Schopenhauer and Yarvin, in their own ways, suggest that the collapse of one kind of power gives birth to another. In youth, power is external. It comes from how others see you. But beyond 40, if one accepts the collapse and embraces reality, power becomes internal. It becomes the power of clarity, the power of independence, the power of not being deceived by illusions anymore. Schopenhauer may have been pessimistic, but he could not deny that wisdom often comes through suffering, and it is through the suffering of illusions lost that women at 40 can discover an authority that no one can take away, the authority of truth. Yarvin would push this further. He would say that when someone is no longer caught in the system's lies, they gain the ability to see how power truly operates. This insight can make them dangerous, not in a destructive way, but in a liberating one. The woman at 40 who has awakened can no longer be controlled by the same illusions that enslave others. She knows the game, and knowing the game means she can step outside of it. This is the paradox. What society often labels as crazy may actually be the first glimpse of sanity. What looks like collapse may actually be transformation. What seems like weakness may secretly be strength. Ending. The harsh truth and the hidden gift. And so, we arrive at the heart of the matter. The question that started this journey, why do women go crazy at 40, has led us far deeper than stereotypes or shallow judgments. Through Schopenhauer, we saw the cruelty of nature, the fading of illusions tied to youth and biology. Through Yarvin, we saw the cruelty of culture, the manipulation of society that sells false promises and then abandons those who believe them. But beneath both perspectives lies the same truth. 40 is an age of reckoning. It is the age when illusions collapse and reality reveals itself in all its brutality, and yet within that collapse is a gift. For those who can endure the pain of disillusionment, there is freedom. There is clarity. There is the possibility of a life not built on lies, but on truth. So perhaps the real question is not why do women go crazy at 40, but what do we call crazy when it is actually the awakening of the human spirit? Perhaps it is easier to mock, to label, to dismiss, because facing the raw truth of time, desire and illusion is too terrifying for most people. But for those who dare to face it, for those who refuse to cling to illusions, 40 does not have to be the end of power. It can be the beginning of a new kind of power. The power of seeing clearly, of living authentically, of being free from the lies that enslave the rest of us. That in the end is the harsh truth, and that too is its hidden gift.